Dear students, welcome to this episode of the fourth unit of Authors in Focus course. We will have a look into the novel Voss by Patrick White. Patrick White, he is an Australian novelist, and Voss is a novel which portrays a literary journey into exploration and the human spirit. And what drives a man to cross a continent? And what does he discover within himself on the way? And was the novel by Australian Nobel laureate Patrick White provides the answer. It isn't just a historical novel, but it is a metaphysical journey through the heart of the Australian desert and the human soul. In this video, we will explore the key themes that make Voss one of the most profound novels in Australian literature. And to begin with, we find that Patrick White, his full name was Patrick Victor Martindale White. He is Australia's only Nobel Prize laureate. He won the Nobel Prize in 1973 and displays the most remarkable explorer novel of the 20th century Australian literary history. It was published in the year 1957 as the fifth novel of Patrick White. And we find that it is an emphasis on the novel's spiritual, psychological, and colonial dimensions. And Voss, the main protagonist, he's a German explorer on an expedition across Australia. And as far as the notable works of Patrick White are concerned, we find The Tree of Man and The Solid Mandala. And he is known for his complex character and symbolism. And to provide the overview of Voss, this novel is supposed to be based on the true record of a mysterious figure of the 19th century Prussian explorer and naturalist Ludwig Leichhardt, who died whilst on an expedition into the Australian outback in 1848. So it is modeled after a true story. And Patrick White himself acknowledges in his notable autobiography, Flaws in the Glass, a self-portrait, which was published in the year 1981. He says the novel has a basis in the 19th century expeditions led by the German explorer Leichhardt. And years before Voss was written, the seed of its eponymous character was sown in the mind of the wartime intelligence officer, unhappily required to censor his own men's letter in the isolation of the Egyptian desert at a time when all lived in the shadow of that great German empire. This novel also makes imaginative use of the diaries of another explorer, Edward John Eyre. And we find that it is a journey through Australia's interior, and we find the dual narrative, expedition and spiritual exploration. And plot summary of this novel. Voss embarks on a perilous expedition. He develops a spiritual bond with Lara Trevelyan, and Voss is a story about a man who determines against all obstacles to lead an expedition overland across the Australian continent. The novel opens in Sydney, 1845, with the German explorer Georg Ulrich Voss, that is the full name of Voss, preparing to cross the Australian continent. Voss' expedition is sponsored by well-to-do Sydney draper Edmund Bonner. After collecting a party of settlers including Harry Roberts, Palfrey Mann, Frank Lee Mazer, and Turner, a drunkard, and two aboriginals. His party heats inland from the coast only to meet endless adversity. The explorers cross drought plagued desert, then sodden lands until they retreat to a cave where they lie for weeks waiting for the rain to stop. Then, after the death of Palfrey Man, an ornithologist who struggles vainly to reconcile his faith with his scientific principles, the traveling party splits in two, one led by Voss and another by Mr. Judd, a recently freed convict, and nearly all members eventually perish. The story ends some 20 years later at a garden party on the day of the unveiling of a statue of Voss. So, we find the key characters in this slide. And moving on to the next slide, we have the major themes of this novel. The novel is all about exploration, achievement, and about disappointment. The novel does not depend merely upon the explorer's passion, insight, and doom, but however, exploration of the unknown is portrayed beautifully, and the spiritual connection is also exhibited then and there. And we find the isolation and the madness which are entwined together, and the love beyond words, and we have the colonialism and identity thread which is looming throughout the novel. And the moving on to the theme of spiritual quest, Voss' journey is symbolic, is more symbolic than geographic. He sees himself as a Christ-like figure, messianic ambition and spiritual pride. The desert becomes a spiritual crucible. It tests his beliefs and self-image, and visionary moments and mystical experiences are portrayed beautifully by the novelists. For example, his dreamlike connection with Lara is portrayed very excellently in this novel. And ultimately, his quest fails outwardly but leads to inner transformation and transcendence. And moving on to the theme of colonialism and empire, this novel serves as a critique for the colonial arrogance, that is, Voss' imperial ego mirrors European ambition, and his encounters with the Aboriginal people. White, the novelist, resists caricature, offering spiritual depth, and Voss' death is not only heroic but ambiguous, questioning the glory of the empire, and the landscape resists domination. Australia is portrayed as unconquerable. And another element which we find is colonialism is equal to spiritual blindness, not just political expansion. And moving on to the theme of identity and hubris, Voss is proud, isolated, intellectually arrogant. He seeks godlike control. His failure exposes the limits of human will and reason. His identity is tied to European ideals which crumble in the outback. He is contrasted with other characters, namely Judd, who is humble and resilient, and Palfrey Man, who is rational but weak, and Lara, she serves as a counterpoint. She is an embodiment of quiet strength, intuitive wisdom, and feminine power. And moving on to love, connection, and duality, Voss and Lara's telepathic connection portrays a spirituality rather than romantic, and letters become vehicles for non-physical intimacy, and love as a means of transcending physical limits is portrayed beautifully by the novelist. Lara represents balance. She is grounded, compassionate, and introspective, and the bond between Lara and Voss is one that of reconciliation of male and female, mind and heart, and self and other. And as far as the theme of isolation and madness is concerned, we find the psychological unraveling of the expedition, the delusions, betrayals, and breakdowns. The vast empty landscape becomes a mirror for inner emptiness. Isolation leads to madness, but also it it raises visionary insight, and Voss' interior monologues blur reality and hallucination, and madness is used to explore the boundaries of rationality and mysticism. And symbolism in Voss. The desert serves as the symbol of inner transformation, and Voss' journey represents the spiritual metaphor, and the letters and silence, they serve as symbols of ineffable communication, and the aboriginal presence, they serve as symbols of the mystical and the unknowable in this novel. And the narrative style, we find the third person omniscient narrative style here, and stream of consciousness mingled with rich symbolic language with shifts between physical and metaphysical give a beautiful rendering of this novel was. And as far as the critical response to this novel is concerned, it is acclaimed for its literary depth, and it is often compared to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, that is, which displays or portrays about traveling into the unknown and frightening heart of a country. And it is complex, somewhat complex, and it is rewarding. It has cemented Patrick White's reputation as a novelist. And Voss is not just about crossing Australia, it is about crossing into the unknown within. The novel challenges colonial myths and explores the mystery of existence. Voss dies in the end, but becomes immortalized through Laura's memory, suggesting redemption through humility and love. And landscape is not the background, but it shapes consciousness, defies conquest. And to conclude, Voss is more than a journey, it is an exploration of the soul. And it is a timeless story of ambition and love, and it is a key work in Australian literary canon. And Patrick White invites us to reconsider what it means to explore. To go in search of something is to risk being found. As White shows us, true greatness may lie not in conquest, but in surrender. Thank you for listening to this video.